to Tylee's bones. So that was probably the biggest moment on cross so far today.
And that's really interesting because you would assume, I would assume anyways, that they would compare the actual tools to the marks, but we'll see what else the state has to present. Chanley, take care of yourself. I know everyone in there, this kind of testimony is beyond emotional, having to hear what happened to these two children. Chanley Painter will continue, of course, to bring us updates from inside that courtroom. Now I'd like to welcome our guests for this hour, law enforcement litigation expert Sonny Slaughter and litigation trial attorney Rich Schoenstein. Of course, thank you to both of you for joining us. Let me start with you, Sonny, because I think it's interesting that Chanley just said during cross-examination we learned that the person that could say there were stabbing and chopping marks on the remains of Tylee, 16 at the time that she was killed, there was no opportunity for that expert witness to compare those marks to actual tools found on Chad Daybell's property, where we know the body was found buried. That surprises me, but give me your perspective.
I was quite surprised as well, because often they want to actually examine all of the potential evidence that is on the scene, and that way they can make those comparisons and identify who could have potentially used those items at some point in time. And because they did not have that evidence with them and they weren't able to examine it, it really puts a gap in the case, although we know that it was very extensive, and the search and the dig and all of the other evidence that they collected, it really does show that they should have paid more attention to ensure that the investigator and those that are examining the body would have access to that information and access to those tools.
Right, to kind of put it all together.
The case.
Right,
yes.
No, I agree. So Rich, tell me this, do you think it's enough for the defense to score these kinds of points along the way? I mean, that was a very valid point brought out on cross-examination. We know alibi is going to be part of the defense. Are these things enough in your mind to convince at least one juror that this is not proof beyond a reasonable doubt and she should not be convicted?
Well, it's a tough case for the prosecution because, again, they can't put blood on the hand of Lori Vallow. They don't show her there at the scene doing these crimes. So they have to prosecute a circumstantial conspiracy case. And by the way, they can't put any of the co-conspirators on the stand. So I do think the defense is going to poke every hole they can and stand up at the end and test reasonable doubt. Has the prosecution, you may think terrible things about the defendant, but has the prosecution shown you beyond a reasonable doubt that she played a part in the horrible murders of these people? I think that's the defense strategy here.
And I think you're right, Rich. We know, at least according to some of the evidence presented so far in opening statements, that we don't expect or have not heard of any forensic evidence, for instance, linking Lori Vallow Daybell to the children, to the scene, to where they were buried. I mean, we have lots of missing pieces, but I think no doubt the emotional aspect of this, and in addition to that, some of her emotions. Chanley just said, Sonny, that she's smiling and chatting with her attorneys. Well, even if she's innocent, we have the presumption of innocence, to hear that she's behaving that way when she too is looking at these horrific pictures of her children, listening to how Tylee was dismembered, how JJ was suffocated with a bag over his head and duct tape on his mouth, I would think that her demeanor would not be smiling and chatting at any point as a mother having to listen to this.
As a mother of 4 children, as we have been watching this, and I have been watching this case over time, I am literally sitting here getting chills thinking of it, and I am not witnessing and looking at that. I cannot imagine how a mother at any point in time, and I am literally on television trying to hold it together at the thought of what those pictures look like. When I think about Tylee being dismembered at 16, JJ being suffocated, I don't know how she's doing it. I don't know what she is thinking, and I've looked at her demeanor as she's walked out, handcuffed and, kind of going to the car, and the smile at the crowd. I think it is very odd behavior. I do not think it is normal, and I think that it just shows the level of disconnect as a parent, as a mother, and as a human, that she acts this way.
Yeah, I agree with you. A level of disconnect, a really great way to describe it, because I think it doesn't make sense to any of us. And as we continue to be together, Rich, and discuss this case, I'm going to want to talk to you about the reality of what the jury might pick up from that, if anything. But right now, we want to go to other court TV trials that we are covering for you. Let's start first in Florida, where the state has rested in the roommate romance murder trial. The defense's only witnesses up, showing the jury new surveillance video. And in Colorado, court is dark today in the stepmom murder trial. But for the first time, we heard Letitia Stalk introduce her other personality, Maria. And breaking news out of Georgia, the jury here has just started deliberating the fate of Austin Ford in the best friend murder trial. You can see the verdict countdown clock is up on your screen. We're at about 19 minutes plus a few seconds. We're going to leave that up. But right now, when we come back, we're going to take you to the rest of the state's rebuttal. Stay tuned.
He fell for a con man and his lies, but did she have anything to do with the murder of his ex-wife?
Every person is capable of murder.
Someone They Knew with Tamron Hall. Tonight, 7/6 Central, only on Court TV.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, expert insight into the autopsies of Lori Vallow Daybell's 2 children. Plus, Court TV teams are live from Boise with the very latest.
Closing Arguments with Vinnie Politan. Tonight at 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
We know Tori's feeling that pressure because we have the testimony of the witness that told you what Tori is taking. Diet medication, prescription diet medication. She's feeling the pressure of being on Instagram. Let's be honest.
And breaking news out of Georgia, the jury just started deliberating in the best friend murder trial. Earlier, the defendant, Austin Ford, said that he would not testify in his own defense, leading the defense to rest without putting on a case. This young man, Ford, is charged with felony murder and manslaughter and the death of his best friend and ex-girlfriend, Tori Lang. The high school honors graduate was shot in the head with her mother's handgun in 2021. The defendant, Ford, has alleged that she was suicidal and ultimately claimed he was holding the gun when she raised it to her head, pulling the trigger. The jury had been hearing the state's rebuttal. We want to take you back in so we can hear the remainder of that. We're picking it right up where we left off.
There was someone else lying next to Tori. Pulled the trigger, probably lying prone. They would have been able to produce that shot. We know that the only other person there was the defendant. That's not basing a case on a lie. That's basing the case on an evidence. Oh, the lie is part of it. But that's not just, oh, he lied, he's guilty. That's ridiculous. Those scientific facts that Dr. Terry testified to, the wound path, her almost instantaneous death, that there is no movement after a brainstem is severed, and her position at her death,